So, climate change literature incorporates many symbols and images and metaphors from climate itself, and it tries to show uh, the the strength of nature, the power of nature through these symbols. So, we were discussing in the last lesson about symbolism and imagery in climate fiction. So, we will go on to discuss more theoretical frameworks as we proceed. So, we talked about hope and activism earlier also, and this kind of idea of activism, of hope, which shows individuals or which shows communities taking actions to combat environmental crisis. This is a very much a part of climate change literature. Collective action and communal harmony are important if one has to deal with the issues of climate change. So, for example, the parable of the sower by Octavia Butler is a story in which the protagonist fights for environmental and social justice in a ravaged world. So, many of these climate fiction texts deal with activism and deal with hope. They give resolutions in this way. They show a way out of the darkness. The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. It is about resilience of the protagonist, Laurel Olamina, who exemplifies hope through her strength and determination to survive in a dystopian world. Second, creation of Earthseed. Earthseed promotes the idea of that God is change. The idea, thirdly, it's about community building. Fourth, empowerment through knowledge. Fifth, challenging social injustice. Sixth, call to action. So, basically all these ideas are part of activism, and there is a step-by-step depiction of these through one character. Thus, for young readers and youth, they show the path forward. Education is very important if one is to undo or sort of mitigate the damage of climate change. Education is very important and knowledge is very important. So, these are all important parts of activism. Let us look at the philosophical perspectives on climate change. We earlier talked about environmental ethics. What does it consist of? What are the main constituents of environmental ethics? Conservationism, protectionism, deep ecology. These facets are very important. Conservationism is conserving nature, protectionism, protecting nature, and deep ecology is an idea that was introduced by Arne Næss, a Norwegian writer and climate activist. So, deep ecology was a social movement, and the crux of the matter was, according to deep ecology, the focus is on valuing nature not for its usefulness but for its inherent value. Now, that makes a difference if industrialists and companies, commercial companies decide to do something about undoing the damage or mitigating the damage of nature, and they say, well, so and so land or orchard or river is serving our purpose. They are serving the purpose of our industry. We need the wood or we need the forest, so we must start replanting and reforesting. So that, according to deep ecology, is not acceptable, because nature is not to be valued on the basis of its usefulness. It should be given consideration for its inherent value, which cannot be explained, which is complex, which is a matter of emotion also, a matter of sentiment also. And Arne was very sentimental about nature. He was part of a lot of climate activism, of certain dams that were being built and certain forests that were being cleared, and he fought to conserve them and to preserve these areas. He had a deep love for mountains. So we'll go into that later on. So these are the ideas that are related to environmental ethics. There is something called intergenerational justice, and that again has been taken up by youth activism. Young people trying to address the issues of climate change. Intergenerational justice is the idea that we owe moral obligation not only to the present generation, but also to future generations. The non-identity problem. Derek Parfit's non-identity problem complicates this debate. The problem asks, can we be said to harm future generations if the choices we make, even those causing environmental harm, are necessary for those particular individuals to exist? So this sort of complicates the matter. If something or some decision is made which is in the benefit of humanity today and maybe harming the environment in the long run, is that acceptable? So this negotiation between the present generation and the future generation, this is called intergenerational justice, and it is a complicated question to answer. And therefore, the idea of deep time is very meaningful, to look beyond the present, look into the future, consider the intergenerational justice and not justice to one community in one period of time. Global justice and inequality. So here we have a picture and shows this climate ravaged land, impoverished people, and people who probably don't have their own land and their houses, and it shows the inequality. And it also tells us that global justice cannot have one face. Different countries have different issues, and therefore certain sensitivity and wisdom is needed, and the past history of injustices has to be brought into consideration. Ethical responsibility means moral responsibility and collective action. The problem of collective action is, if each individual or entity is responsible for only a small portion of greenhouse gas emissions, how can we assign blame or responsibility for the whole? So again, this is a question of justice. It's an ethical question, that if one individual is responsible for damaging the environment around him, how can we blame that person for creating damage all around? But actually it is not so. As said earlier, what is happening in the affluent countries, the large amount of fossil fuel burning and the larger carbon footprint, it may not be felt as hard in an affluent country, but the effects are felt in other countries. So it's like the whole earth is one. We cannot be divided in this way that, if something is happening in one place, so we can blame that person only, and that person is not responsible to what is happening outside. But climate and nature and atmosphere is not like that. The sea currents, the air currents, the dust, the changing seasons, everything has a cycle and a circulation. So the earth is one place where humans and non-humans are living. So there has to be a shared and individual responsibility, and there has to be a moral or ethical motivation towards addressing climate apathy, to indifference to climate change. So the first and foremost, obviously, is education and knowledge. Unless and until the young people do not know about these issues, they do not know about the threats that they are going to face or they are facing, one cannot hope for any redemption. One cannot hope for any hope against climate change damage. Ecofeminism and the climate crisis. Now, ecofeminism is important, brings the connection from feminist theories. Women are an important part of this climate change suffering. When we look at villages in remote parts of India, it's the women who are the ones who have to take charge of the family, who have to provide the food to the family, who have to fetch the water, who have to take care of the children, and also take care of themselves. So there's a deep connection between ecology and feminism. Often the women in the farms and fields, they work more than the men. If there is a crop that is planted, a lot of the work is done by the women at home. The husking and the cutting and the threshing, a lot of it is done by women, in addition to the household jobs. The most difficult is they're going to fetch water from wells that are dry, which means they have to walk for miles and miles in the deserts like of Rajasthan to fetch water. And also their safety and security becomes a concern when they have to get up in the early hours of morning and travel very far to pull out water from some well that is already drying, or to get water from some pond that is quite polluted because it is the only source of water nearby. So ecofeminism is about ecology and feminism, and it critiques the patriarchal structures that prioritize domination and exploitation both of nature and women. So when we talk of exploitation of nature, it's really the same, the exploitation of women. And the closeness between the two victims is very apparent and very clear. Women are the ones who are closer to nature in many ways. So one of the important feminist environmental activists is Vandana Shiva. And she speaks a lot about various things related to climate change, about damage to the environment. One of the words that she has used in her writing is Annadana. Annadana is the giving of food. And again, women are very closely related with this value of giving food, because it's the woman in India who cooks the food. And so she is the one who distributes and feeds. So in her essay, Annadana, she talks about how nature is like woman, a giver of food. And we need to thank nature for that food that comes to us. We need to value it when it comes to us directly. And what comes to us directly is pure. But when that food is recycled and industrialized and processed, it is poor in nutrients and it has lost its value. So she talks about the gift of food in the context of climate change. Existential philosophy and climate nihilism. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus explored themes of human freedom, meaninglessness, and the absurdity of existence, which resonate in the context of the climate crisis. So these very existentialist ideas, they resonate in the climate crisis also. Many of the climate texts that we tend to read, we find a sense of isolation, loneliness, the futility of living in this world, and the absurdity. And this is more so when there is a dwindling and of resources, especially in dystopian futures. And then those few and resources are controlled by a higher power, and then life there becomes meaningless. So there is something that talks about individual respect, the right to liberty, the right to freedom, the right to live for one's health, for oneself also in the midst of all this. So too much of uh, control because of resources, because of the loss of resources in climate change, that brings us in contact with existentialism. Climate nihilism, this perspective leads to fatalism and inaction. So absolute disbelief that there's anything called climate or anything that is change in climate, and whatever happens because something is fated. That leads to fatalism, and obviously this is not a form of being active, it's a form of being inactive. So it's like saying, what should I do and why should I do it? It's fated to be like this. So there is an important novel, The Rapture, which deals with this climate nihilism, about the drilling of oils under the sea, and it ends also on a very negative note, but eventually it shows that there can be nothing that can save the earth. The evangelical group, the group of Christian followers, they believe that there is a moment of rapture when God will deliver them. And then so when climate change comes and the planet is burning up, they say it's fated and we will all die. It is deliverance for us. So you can see this idea of fatalism and inaction. It has also been taken up by climate fiction. Hope and existential courage are also there. There is radical hope also, that they a form of optimism that is not based on the likelihood of success, but on the belief in the possibility of a meaningful future in which one learns to adapt. So there are many books and there are many movies on dystopian futures in which the human beings are learning to live. They learn to adapt. So whatever the circumstances are, they learn to adapt, and they evolved into some kind of some weird kind of human beings, but that's a way of coping with the damage of climate change. The philosophy of technology and geoengineering. What is geoengineering and what are the moral hazards of geoengineering? Technological optimism. Some see technological solutions like carbon capture, solar radiation management, or reforestation as a potential way to mitigate climate change. This optimism believes that human ingenuity can solve the crisis. And yet there are others who have a technological skepticism, and if they are skeptical about this, that technology can help In fact, they believe that technology can make things worse. And this is quite factual, as mentioned earlier, that the use of computers all over the world uh, take up gallons of water. Every moment on the internet uses gallons of water. So it's technology that is helping us to stay connected, technology that is helping us to deal with the ideas of climate change, but it is also depleting the natural resources. This is something that we need to think about. Climate change and psychoanalytical criticism. Psychoanalytical criticism is a literary theory based on the principles of psychoanalysis forwarded by Freud, Jacques Lacan. So, it is an exploration of the unconscious mind, repressed emotions, desires, and anxieties in literary texts. And this is again applied to climate change, and this is another area of study. We call it eco-anxiety. In the context of climate change, psychoanalytical criticism explores how environmental crises resonate with the human psyche, including unconscious fears, denials, anxieties, and collective psychological responses to ecological disaster. So, we will discuss some of these details when we are discussing youth activism. And the youth are vulnerable, and they are the ones who do not know how to address all these pictures and depictions of climate change in movies and books. So this kind of fear is instilled into them. So a third psychoanalyst was Jung, Carl G. Jung. So along with Freud and Lacan, Jung is also one of the psychoanalysts who talks about the frames of mind, the unconscious mind. So the key concepts in psychoanalytical criticism relevant to climate change are the unconscious, repression and denial, anxiety and fear, ego, superego and id. Freud's model of the mind can be used to analyze how human impulses, id, moral responsibilities, superego and rational decision making, ego, conflict in the face of climate change. So as we discussed earlier, that it is not just the environment that is damaged because through climate change, but it is the human personality, it is the mind, it is the psyche that is affected by it. And which brings me to another idea forwarded by Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth, where the native, when he wants to fight back, he has been brainwashed. He does not have weapons to fight back against the colonizer, so he uses these psychological tools to fight back. So what is with him is only his unconscious, is only his feelings, his impulses in his mind, and these are the things that become a tool. He fights back by using that culture of which his mind and his being is a part. So he fights back by using that magic or using those cultural traditions. So in this way, he sort of asserts himself. So in this way, psychoanalytical criticism is important because it talks about the damages to the psyche of the native. And the psyche is very important because it is a kind of tool for fighting against oppression. And here in this case, here it is climate oppression. It is nature that has been damaged, the nature of which he is a native. So his mind suffers damage, and he has to choose ways to fight back, and he has to use psychological tools to fight back. So in this way, this theory is very important and very relevant. Climate change and the collective unconscious. Carl Jung has talked about the collective unconscious, the universal general pool of the unconscious mind, in which there are collective memories and archetypes which are commonly shared by the whole universe, and this can be used as a collective response to climate change. So the images that represent the collective unconscious and which are related to the environment, they signify a collective response to the environmental degradation. So ecological destruction may trigger archetypal fears of apocalypse, survival and chaos. So you can see the extreme importance of psychological or psychoanalytical studies and climate change. Then there are environmental archetypes. Jungian analysis can interpret recurring motifs of nature, such as the wilderness, flood or storm, as archetypes that symbolize deep fears and hopes regarding humanity's relationship with environment. In fact, Carl Jung's studies and experiments in the Eastern world revealed to him that there was a deep connection with the human psyche and the external environment of nature. And disruptions in this connection led to disturbances. So, for him, a wholeness of personality, a completeness of personality was in the oneness with nature. It was the healing would take place when one would return to nature, when the psyche would be allowed to return to nature, to where it belongs. So, the distance that is created by commercialism, by material existence, the further and further one goes away from one's relationship from nature, the more broken a person becomes, the more diseased a person becomes. So, the deep fears that are engendered by climate change are the outcome of the distance from nature that is created by artificial hopes and aspirations for a wealthy lifestyle and for creating a carbon footprint in the atmosphere. Eco-anxiety and climate change. Eco-anxiety is a psychological response to climate change characterized by feelings of helplessness, guilt, and fear about environmental degradation. Psychoanalytical interpretation. Eco-anxiety can be seen as the surfacing of repressed fears about mortality, the fragility of life, and the uncontrollability of nature. So, some examples are the novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and where the characters experience existential dread and anxiety in a post-apocalyptic world. So, we will discuss this further in the next lesson. I hope you were able to see some important perspectives in connection with theory of literature and climate change. We will meet in the next lesson. Thank you.